Welcome back to my channel where you get to learn from my mistakes, as any wise man would do. It's been a long time since I made a video, and I still have this car, almost 7 years. And that means I gotta work on it. And I want to give you some of the aftermath of what happened with this wheel bearing. Um, it went reasonably well. At the moment, I'm stuck on an axle. I chose to replace the axle slash axles, and the new one is ever so slightly too long. And best I can figure, it's made for the automatic and not the manual like I have. So maybe that's the difference. Is it's a little bit longer for some reason. Um, all-wheel drive in both cases, but I thought I'd leave it out so I could use it to kind of show, at least maybe if you have this car and this situation where you want to replace this axle and you're looking at O'Reilly's, which is what this part is, import direct, the axle on the right, maybe you want to consider not doing that. And I'd like to emphasize some of the things that you need to consider to avoid having to replace axles. I feel like it's an overlooked thing anytime you start getting into this part of the car. They take a beating on the road as it is, and wailing on the end will definitely ruin an axle, and I'll show you that. But I did do this bearing. At the moment, it has the hub on and the bearing in and the hub on, and so right now it's ready for an axle. It's ready to be put together and be done. And I thought this was a good opportunity to show what it took to do this. As in my other videos that I posted a while back, there's a bunch of stuff that I have never done before, so I'm trying to learn from YouTube and show you what I've learned and how I screwed up. And if you learn from me and don't make my mistakes, and then you should at least be helped out a little bit. That's my goal anyways. So I took the advice of one YouTuber and used this part from Harbor Freight and set it up behind the hub, and that worked really well. You have to alternate the lug bolts in this case, because you can only get 3 on this plate at one time. So you got like 2 on one side and you rotate it around, then you got 2 on the other side, and that way you're kind of walking it down, but not severe enough that you're cocking it, because it's still relatively flat. But you do got to kind of rotate it and use a torch, and I didn't hammer on it. That may have helped, who knows. But that worked pretty well, but that created a new problem. New problem is that the lug bolts do mushroom out. Now I, at least in this case, was smart enough to use my old lug bolts because I have aftermarket wheels and different lug bolts that came with it. So I used my old ones. So I used these 3, and you can see I had to grind these down quite a bit in order to get them off the hub. I mean, they mushroomed out like something fierce. Now, I didn't grind off this end, and I'm planning to use these again on the other side. I have the other side yet to do. Again, I'm trying to optimize my opportunity here. I have all this stuff laid out right now, so I still have a little bit of work to do yet, but my plan is to use these bolts again, and I know they'll mushroom out, but hopefully they will mushroom out within this space at the end here, and I don't have to sacrifice anymore. At this point, I have another bolt laying around somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where it is. I thought I had it here, but you could look to see how much, if any, there's rust on the end here, which would tell you that's the part that's hanging past it, and maybe that's okay. If you have a little bit of rust here, then that means you're not relying on those threads. In this case, I've kind of sacrificed these bolts. Like I said, maybe I'd have to find the other bolt and see if it's rusty like that, but I don't care because I have different wheels anyways, I think that's something that you can pick up at the dealership, but here goes, 14-year-old car, parts are getting harder and harder to find as I'm starting to find out. This axle is not right, but before I get to that, so anyways, relatively speaking, everything went well. Had to grind down and shave those bolts down in order to get them out of the hub. Cleaned up the hub pretty good. I got all my tools here, you can kind of see, but you can see that Milwaukee, I have like a wire wheel on it. Cleaned it up real good. But here's a couple of things I wanted to point out. If you have a axle that's seized on there, which I believe in this case it was essentially rust welded on. In this case, the only way that I know of to get this axle out was to pull off the hub, which does pull off, the face of the bearing. I don't know a way around that. And to make things worse, on the original axle, there's no, here we go. I don't know if you can see that. I'm getting the light. There's no center punch hole. So if you have put something on there to try to keep it centered, it ain't gonna be centered. It's just gonna sit there and slide around. So with this particular axle, it's even more of a pain to try to get it off. So that being the case, it may be that the only way to get this axle off, if this is all seized, is to take the hub off. And by taking the hub off, you're removing the face of the bearing, and so replacing an axle turns into a bearing job. I don't see a way around that, and if there's a way around that, where you can apply some sort of center punch strong enough to break that free, or some sort of configuration, let me know in the comments. Maybe we can learn together, share this information around, but I don't see a way around it. In this case, my problem was beating on it with a hammer, and I didn't even beat on it that much, but it was enough to deform enough of the threads to have to grind it to a point that the nut would slide back on. Here, I'll whip this around again here. You can see that's how far I had to grind it after only whacking it a little bit. And so now at this point, reach across here. At this point, more from memory, this is relatively, like when it's screwed in, it's about even. And that means there's, I don't know, 3 or 4 threads that aren't really grabbing on. Even if it's just a few, this is now compromised, because not as many threads are going to grab as are supposed to. In fact, I had to grind down to a point that even tapping this in would be not that effective, because these are now not that deep. So you tap the corners in on this, and so that's why I decided I need new axles, and that's my fault. At the same time, 200,000 mile axle, I don't feel terrible about it. This is the Import Direct axle, so-called replacement. You can see it's quite a bit thinner. By my crude calculations, it's a couple of pounds lighter, so that doesn't hurt, being a little lighter, so long as it does the same job. And at the price of the original at the dealership, the new one on the left is $800 and some dollars. This one is $170, but it doesn't fit, so I don't know what the actual price is going to be, because I need to get the correct axle. But since we're there talking about it, you can just see this little part right here is just a little bit deeper than this little part right here. Seems to be the only difference. I would say too that this seems to be thicker than this, but it seems that overall, like maybe the shaft is compensating for that difference, and it seems like the difference seems to be about that much, about the difference in these little bubbled out parts. I mean, it's so close. I just literally can't get it in. And if I did get it in, I question if it's even supposed to go in, binding and whatnot. In any case, I wanted to just cover that real quick, get my fat finger out of the way, and wanted to touch on a couple more things about how I did this. Like I said, I did sacrifice, bolts for this. As far as hammering on the end, you can turn this around, hammer on this side, but it seems like this, let me get this one instead. You can kind of see it's pretty chewed up, but theoretically you could put it on this way and hammer on this side, where the axle is. But again, it was rust seized. I didn't see a way around it. I feel like if it's that old and that seized, then you probably are due for a bearing anyways. Maybe that's the way to look at it. This 3-jaw pliers would have worked if two things. If it had, point to it here, if it had the center punch and if it wasn't rust seized, that would have actually worked okay to remove that. But in the process of trying, it did mushroom and flatten out the tip there. I don't remember how I kept it center. I want to say I just held it by hand. Anyway, so those were the adventures of getting it out. Got it out. Actually, before even getting it out, I had to get the snap ring out. Sure would have been great to reuse this because replacing these has been a bit of a pain in the butt. Parts store by my place had one and the dealership had one, so now I got a pair for the back. But like, wow, one at the dealership and one at a parts store and none at any of the other parts stores. You wouldn't figure, but snap rings. So if they're as bad as this, seized up as this, and getting that out, as you can tell, is very fun. Something to keep in mind. Try to line that up in advance. Get yourself a snap ring, even if you're thinking you won't need it. Couple more things. I feel like it was underemphasized, so I'll make a point of it. What side goes in? Well, I heard somebody say magnetic side goes in, and here's the original bearing, and you could tell this was the side that was in, and probably don't have the best tool, but you can feel the magnetic fields, there, and so that at least keeping it the same, that this was the magnetic side going in, this is the magnetic side going in, and I believe that interfaces with the speed sensor so that it knows the speed. Wanted to just double check that because to my eyes, the other side looks more the same, and hyper scrutinizing the two sides, at the end of the day I couldn't tell anymore, and then I realized that actually playing around with it, a tool touched it and I could feel that. I'm like, oh, okay, so there you go. So magnetic strip goes toward the car, pretty sure, because there's this is the passenger side, so the speed sensor is kind of on the back side of the knuckle, and it interfaces with that. You can see my e-brake is still ready to put on, my torch and my cleaner. A couple other little tidbits. I contemplated replacing the hubs. The hubs were kind of spendy, maybe $1.50 a piece, and so I decided not to. So what I decided to do was to use the cheapest, most effective tool in at least an auto body technician's toolbox is a pick tool. You're talking like $1, and it's the tool that you use all day long if you work in that field specifically, but it's pretty handy all around. This one, Harbor Freight, a few bucks. They break, but like I said, they're a few bucks. But the reason why I bring this one up in particular is because it seemed to work out pretty well. I took this hub and cleaned out the teeth with this, kind of rolled it around for each groove, like not just straight up and down, but kind of rolled it around for each groove, and I really was able to get a lot of the friction out of it. You could feel the rust breaking off. I mean, again, this is an old hub, uh, and then I cleaned it up with the wire wheel and a couple of different wire attachments there, and it seemed to do pretty good, because even though this axle is the wrong axle, that part slid in like butter. I did grease that the just the tips here, so that in the act of putting it in, it kind of draws it in, and it just, like, that was not even remotely an issue. Like, that just slid in like you wouldn't believe. So new axle, old hub, cleaned it with some parts cleaner, and really went after it with this. And I would say, if you're going to use the original axle, maybe consider, if there's rust on here. And this one, I am actually not even seeing really any rust here, but even just to clean it up, probably not a bad idea just to do that, because that's the type of thing that's gonna, I say, set it up for the next guy, because the next guy might be you. That's what I say. So in any case, just to recap, I did go this route. Very effective. You sacrifice the lug nuts. You got to grind off the ends. Oh, just one other little tidbit thing. As far as compressors go, I have way over there a very small compressor, a 5-gallon, I think, and I was able to make it work with a grinder enough to grind off the ends of those bolts and the axle. And before I forget, I wanted to touch on one other thing. Here's Harbor Freight gear puller set, whatever they're referring to it as. The spacers are great. This is my little review. The spacers are great, but you're looking at in the middle there, the that's the bolt, which is like an elongated bolt, on the shaft, minus the bolt head. Actually, the bolt head, there it is, and the washer behind it. I had to cut that SOB off. In the process of pushing out the bearing, that thing basically mushroomed out all of the teeth of the threads, and just seized up. Like, in the act of trying to release it and undo it, it seized up, and I didn't have a choice, so I had to cut it off. So that's my little review of Harbor Freight. Actually, a good set, just that bolt has limits, and I proved that here. It actually turned out good. I was in the process of swapping out a couple of the cups to make it fit a little bit better, so it wasn't drawn all the way tight quite yet. And I had enough slack to cut off the bolt head, so fortunately I didn't have to fight it too much. But with a weak compressor and a grinder, actually a cutoff wheel, I would just recommend getting this one, just simply for the fact that the bolt is a lot more substantial than the Harbor Freight one. In fact, you can kind of see how fine the threads are. This is pretty robust. I don't know if the steel itself is any different, but this is actually thicker. You can kind of see, how, there you go, how much thicker it is. And so the spacers are actually pretty similar, right? A huge difference. So really it just came down to just the power of that bolt in order to push the bearing through. And to be honest with you, I felt like I was doing more work with these 3 lug nuts than I was with doing that, so I was a little surprised. Aside from that, you may need yourself this Dremel, in order to make that cut. People just kind of gloss over that. I happen to have one I've used it so many times for so many reasons for so many years. This thing is old, so I'm fortunate to have that. But if you don't have this, it could it could be difficult to get that collar off of the hub. Kind of almost a necessary tool. If you don't have this, you're going to be faced with using a cutoff wheel, again, if you even have one, or even a compressor that you can use the cutoff wheel with. it could be an issue. So you'd be more looking at trying to separate it, similar to the bearing itself. So, that seems to be glossed over a little bit. So I hope this was helpful. I do have, a lot more parts that I'm planning to put on this car. At the moment, it needs this, so I'm just kind of doing the minimum before I plunk down a whole bunch of money, which I'm planning to do. Planning to plunk down a whole bunch of money. And specifically, I'm going after suspension, and I will discuss that in the next video. Leave your comments below. I'm not a mechanic. Some of you are, and you can enlighten me on some of these things. Fireworks, torches, that's I had to buy that, so not a huge investment. Most of these tools are Harbor Freight, but my good tools aren't, but you can still get by on Harbor Freight. Essentially just that one screw, that was the very disappointing thing. That one screw failing like it did, made me have to break out the heavy equipment just to remove the tool that's supposed to help was no longer helping, and that was frustrating. So otherwise, like I said, leave comments down below. More videos to come. I'm keeping the car and got more projects for it. I know there's some of you out there that don't have M3s. You got 3 Series, and some cases got the XI. So here we go. We're gonna go for it and put a bunch of parts on this car.